There was in one of my class last night, we had to give a metaphor for how it's like to be in a PhD program. And the class went around, and when it came to me, I was like, being in a doc program at my stage and my age in life feels like giving birth all over again. And I didn't get pregnant. And I'm just like, wait, what? What's happening? Wait, for contractions? There's no man?
You got it, sis. You got it. You got it. Push through it, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's all you can do because the baby's coming anyhow.
That's right.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate everyone for coming in and being a part of the call. We got about 4 minutes, so that's cool. We got about 4 minutes, but this has been a whirlwind, but it's been good. It's been good. Got a chance to meet some real good people, interview some real good people that are doing some good work, and a tough work, to be honest about it. I mean, this is a daunting task, but certainly, obviously you all are up to it. So I'm glad you guys had a chance to kind of meet and connect, and waiting on a couple more panelists. And
okay,
starting T-minus 3 minutes.
Brother Will, you got me feeling like I'm underdressed, man. I need to run upstairs for a second.
I know, that's why I'm like, I'm zipping my collar up, trying to fix myself. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? He cheated. He didn't tell us about the dress attire.
Not only did I do the top half, but if I can stand up, I got the bottom half taken care of too.
Well, you way sharper than I am. Let me tell you that right now.
That's all right. That's all right, Doc. We're going to get him on the next one.
That's right.
Yeah, we're going to get him on the next one, y'all.
If I stand up, my video's going to be gone.
Yeah.
Because, we were talking, this topic is so huge and so multi-layered that obviously today, 1 hour and a half panel discussion is not going to do it justice. So, we're looking, if you guys are willing, we're looking at, I know Al and I have been talking, we're looking at making this a series once a month up through at least May or June, because we're coming up into that. We got a couple things happening where you got COVID that's going to be a lesser of an issue. We got young people between those ages of like 26, 27, down to I don't know, maybe 18, down to 15, 16, that they're going to be out and about. And as they're out and about, obviously the chances of having these interactions with law enforcement go up and up. And so as we can, so that's kind of what we were thinking, and just something for you guys to consider, because
honey,
so
you get me some coffee when you go out, because I'm here till 11.
What?
I need a coffee large.
When you think about that, William, and putting that together, it might be, it might be fascinating for you to consider in one of your upcoming series, having your panel intergenerational, where you're integrating the voices of young Black and Brown bodies who are really already in the work. So it would be interesting to hear how, how they're already in the work, how, we don't actually need to onboard them. They're already engaged now. So it might be wonderful to have, or even have like a millennials, these, or I don't even know the younger, what they're labeled now, but as a panel for, and then have your audience, the invitees, be that specific age group.
So you're saying having the audience be the millennials or the panelists be the
both?
Yeah.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be fun to play around with and explore what that might look like, and
I think that definitely has a lot of merit to that. Absolutely, I appreciate that. And I guess when you get 50, I call myself, I'm 50 and 1. I'm still a millennial in my mind, but body and cohort, I'm not. So I guess I have my kids are millennials, so I guess maybe I do have some context. Never mind. I retract that statement. Because my question was, how do you connect with them to actually, get them engaged in that process, and where are they? And obviously, having a William Peterson III who's on the call, my son, having a Mark DeWitt, who's at Sinclair Community College, who heads up the African American Male Initiative at Sinclair Community College. Having those types of folks on the team, so to speak, could definitely speak to that. Absolutely. And we will be looking, and we as a group, we do need that input to make this better as we go forward and more impactful and more useful. We had a couple people join us. We have Officer Ron Strahaley, he's on the call from Dayton Police. We have Melissa Ward from Sinclair Community College, I see is on the call, and we have Pastor Bruce Moxley from Dominion Ministries International. Welcome.
Welcome.
Right. Well, it is 9:31, and what I'd like to do as we get started is the non-panelists at this point, if you guys could, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'll give you some second to get get everything tidied down. But if you also could just maybe take 15, 30 seconds to tell who you are, your organization, and why this topic of policing in Black and Brown communities are important to you. I'll kick it off to Melissa Ward.
Regular call.
Yeah, maybe.
Thanks, William. My name's Melissa Ward, and I am the program specialist for the Young Scholars Program at Sinclair. I can't imagine this not being anybody's, wanting more information about this, but, we do have students, African-American males, but I just feel like, I guess even if they weren't in my program, it still affects me every time I turn on the TV or I watch the news. So I can't imagine everyone shouldn't be feeling the same way. So that's me.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. We're going to go out to the great state of Dayton, Ohio. Pastor Bruce Moxley, are you available?
Important for students to see.
Yes, I am. Good morning to everyone. I'm Pastor Bruce Moxley of Dominion Ministries. We are currently out in the Clayton Inglewood area. And obviously for me, this is definitely a very, very important topic. Having number one, being an African-American man in the community, as well as having those that are in our congregation, and even looking at things across our nation. It is something that's just vitally, definitely needs to be continued to be addressed and come to some type of conclusions and solutions. So I'm just excited to hear, what the panelists have to say regarding the topic, and continue to grow in this area.
Thank you, Pastor Moxley. Thank you, Pastor Moxley. We're going to go out to a dear friend of mine, Diana Peterson. If you're available, if you can, again, give us a few words. Okay. We're gonna go right on to then Al Phillips, my brother.
She has to unmute her mic.
Yep. Well, Al, we're gonna just go ahead and take it to you, Al, and again,
okay.
Give a 30-second commercial of who you are and why this is important to you.
This is very important to me because, I deal with young people. I'm associate pastor over at Maranatha Worship Center. And it just grits my heart to see how young people respond to the police. I mean, it's been a serious high levels of fear amongst youth when we encounter any interaction with the police. And it seems like the problem is not getting better. It's just getting worse. And so I think that, we need to just help them to develop strategies on how to deal with the police and just tone down the level of fear. And I just feel that it's so important for us. So, I got with Mr. Peterson and we decided to just do something about it and try to get as many people together. The focus for me is for us to develop strategies and to help the young people to actually learn what to do when you see those blue and red lights begin to show up in the back of your car. You need to have a strategy and a plan as to what to do to tone down and to cooperate with the police so that you don't end up in a situation where you can't handle. So, you know, that's just a big passion on my heart, just to have. I was a young person. I've been through this, being young and Black, and the older I got, I decided in my head that I'm going to not have these situations with the police, and I've just changed the way I approach the whole situations. And so I thank God for Mr. Peterson, who decided to come on in, and we just decided to put something together to make this happen. So I thank you all for coming and be a part of this.
I know we had to thank you, Al, for your leadership. We had a couple people join us, a couple millennials. I'm gonna send it out to the city of Bowling Green, Ohio. Pete, are you available?
Yeah, I'm available. All right. Well, what's going on, everybody?
What's going on?
Not much, you know, just living, happy to be here. Definitely grateful for this opportunity today. So just to introduce myself, my name is William Peterson III. You know, so right. I hold that name up to a high standard. But just goes to say, you know, thankful for having a father in my life to be able to help guide me. And it's an amazing opportunity to have an event with my dad. It's kind of crazy, but like we both, you know, are on like the same mind wave, and it's a blessing to be able to learn from him as well. But I'm currently at Bowling Green, Ohio, a senior here, graduating in May. I'm majoring in middle childhood education. I'm actually at work right now. I teach for my student teaching my last semester, so I told my teacher to cover for me while I'm on this event. And like I said earlier, just grateful for this moment, and it's always an honor to gain knowledge, and I'm glad that here we are able to have the opportunities for everyone to be able to gain knowledge, and that's something that no one can take from us. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to the next person, whoever that may be.
Well, I see Shamari Payne. If it's not too much to put you on the spot, are you available?
Yes, I'm available. Let me turn my camera on. How you doing, everybody? I've just received a link from Melissa about this event, and I just wanted to come in and absorb some knowledge and information from everybody. So excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you. I mean, the work that you're doing in the community as a young man, I mean, just dynamite, you know, already a published author, you know, and just doing some dynamite things and impacting this age group that we're talking about. So we're certainly excited to have you on the call. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, we're already started. We're going to go ahead and get started with the panelists. And so I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. There we go. All right.
One thing when you said let me in this joint.
All right. So today's topic is policing in Black and Brown communities. And just a couple of housekeeping items, if you could. If you're not currently speaking, just go ahead and put your microphone on mute. We do like sideline conversations. Some of them might not be appropriate, or the dog barking in the background or whatever. It's all good. So just make sure you guys are conscious of that. So policing in Black and Brown communities. And one of the things that we wanted to just get the purpose of today's discussion is to provide insight and context to the current state of affairs relating to civilian police interactions. We see a lot in the media, and you know, even with the media, we also have to understand too that we know if it bleeds, it leads, and so we want to be able to have some context to that as well. Secondly, we want to foster a robust and even-handed conversation, and coming from that standpoint, so some of the things, there may be some tough things that are being said, but we also want to make sure it's even-handed and balanced. And lastly, to provide possible solutions for a way forward for the younger generation. Now, will we accomplish this in this meeting, in this gathering, in this particular setting? Probably not, but we'll start that process. And we've had, some conversations prior to the call, prior to the 9:30, where, there may be some opportunities where we continue the series, especially as we lead up into the warmer months, where young people will be more apt to be out and more interactions with police. But we're excited about our panelists. So we're going to go on to our facilitators, our William Peterson and Al Phillips and William Peterson. And we're going to go into our panelists. Pastor T is a professor and author and founding pastor of Dominion and Praise Worship Center and husband of Paula Bridgman. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Organizational Leadership from Point University and a Master of Divinity degree from International Theological Center in Atlanta. Tommy Bridgman, AKA Pastor T, is a pastor and civil rights activist who has been fighting for justice by working with programs such as Ceasefire Violence Prevention Campaign, and also he's also a violence interrupter. Tommy's commitment to the community influenced him to develop the seminar Think Free, Feel Free, Live Free, which was the inspiration of this book, newly authored book, The Police Encounter Bible. And I tell you what, I read this book and, I just said, we got to order the book. I mean, it's an easy read. It's maybe 70 some odd pages, but everything in those chapters is so concise and precise to foster a conversation with your sons, your daughters, your any young person that you have in your life. Pastor Tommy, I'm going to give the mic to you for a couple minutes. Can you talk a little bit about, we read your bio, but talk a little bit about where you are with the police encounter, your seminars, and just why this topic is important to you and where you're going with this. You might have to unmute your phone, Pastor.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, let me say thank you for having me. I'm honored to be a part of this discussion with your distinguished panelists and dealing with this important issue. First, let me say, I believe that this is the idea of encounters and transforming the minds, not just of the community, but of law enforcement as well, is a huge undertaking. It's a system that's been in place forever, right? And anything that has that type of structural history has to be chipped away at if we're trying to rebuild it. It's not like we can ignite a stick of dynamite, and just blow it all up and then rebuild it, but it's a huge undertaking. And so this topic became so important for me, not only because of my past experiences. And I heard Brother Albert talk about, changing his life and changing his directions that kind of stopped some of the interactions. And I believe personally, we kind of age out of the interactions, not so much as with what we're doing with how we're living, but we kind of age out of certain situations when we have responsibilities like families and jobs and different things that require us to be other places than just hanging out or being about. And so it kind of minimizes the encounters at that point. But the idea that during an encounter where no crime has been committed and there wasn't a crime from the beginning, and an individual can end up in an encounter, and after the encounter or during the encounter, a crime is committed or reported to have committed, and the person could lose their freedom, or lose their life even, is frightening. And I think a problem that many of us have, primarily in the African-American community, is we've learned throughout this traumatic life experience how to disassociate ourselves from those events and those encounters. And once I allowed myself to live in the reality that we live in, I realized that no matter what kind of parent I am, and what kind of mentor I am, and what kind of friend I am to my children and to my family, what has happened to so many families around this country and even the world could have happened to me. And you could have been as on point as you could possibly be at every game and in their lives, and reading their messages, monitoring who they're hanging out with, all of the necessary things to protect your children and protect your family. But you still could be a victim of this type of an encounter. And so that's one of the reasons that this is so important to me.
Well, yeah, I certainly appreciate that. And so our first area, as we talk about, is this context of the context of what's going on currently. And our next panelist is S. Ray Peoples. She is the founder of Red Lotus Consulting, which is a race and equity justice and social justice boutique. For the past 2 decades, she's worked to cultivate justice, equity, and inclusion within the education, political, and non-profit sectors. Her writings and opinions have been published in the Washington Post, the East Bay Express, the Open Post, Blogger, as well as Young, Fabulous, and Self-Employed magazine. She serves as co-chair of the board of directors for the North Atlantic Books. She has recently been appointed to the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Governance Committee for an arts college. Ms. Peoples, when we talk about the context of the current state of affairs and the history of when it comes to policing, and you being an educator, pursuing your doctorate, and being in that collegiate environment, and also being a mom, talk a little bit about what this topic means to you.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be a part of the conversation, and I'm here to like learn and make connections. And I appreciate the question. I feel like this matter is heavy, and it matters to me. I'm completely invested in it from all parts of my identity, as a mother, first and foremost, as a Black woman, as a member that I feel am active in my community, as a human being. This is a grave matter, right? Because for me, at the core of all of this is if we don't figure out how to be in better relationship with each other, that is going to be to the detriment of all of our existence. So there's broader ramifications to this conversation if we don't get it right. And for me, I'm holding a sense of urgency around this. Like with every year, with every summer, with every hashtag of a beautiful life gone,
yeah,
the urgency around this is picking up. So that's what I'm holding, and I appreciate Pastor T's comment around disassociation, right? So a part of the other side of this for me is I know that disassociation is really, it's the body's response to trauma, right? It's a natural response from your like parasympathetic nervous system. So we are carrying, the Black community, Black bodies, brown bodies are carrying a lot of trauma from suffering. And so my question and my inquiry while I'm having these conversations and listening to you all is really how, for the Black community, what's the sweet spot for us? How do we heal and tend to the trauma so that we can re-engage, so we can reconnect to what matters and heal ourselves? How do we heal in the midst of the suffering and the violence? It's very, that's a very nuanced inquiry. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm open to hearing what it could look like from these discussions.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this discussion, and we're going to Judy Seeley's career in law enforcement has an interesting start. She began in the hospitality industry, serving as a waitress in high-end restaurants. She later moved on to work as a dispatcher for the Dayton Police Department. The experience she gained in taking and responding to calls grew a compassion in her that fueled her to go higher. She was promoted to beat officer for Montgomery County Sheriff's Department and later took the test to become a sergeant. She was promoted to captain, where one of her job duties included opportunities to work in schools, where she taught students best practices when encountering law enforcement. Ms. Seeley, are you available?
Yes, I am.
So I hope I got some of that right. I know we had talked a little bit before.
Yes.
And you care to elaborate on this topic and what it means to you?
Yes, I am really glad to be here today. Working in law enforcement and seeing where we are now within our community is kind of heartbreaking that we aren't able to come together and unite as far as the African American race. My reason for wanting to do this, because I've done so much with kids throughout my career. It's been guided towards juvenile community, a lot of community as what I have done in the schools, just throughout in the streets, just feeding people and learning our kids through things like that. But I think that we really need to be able to educate our kids, educate our parents about being united. I don't think we really know who we are. So we can get them to realize who they are. Because once you know who you are, nobody can tell you anything. Nobody can take anything from you. Once you know who you are, if we can get them to realize who they are, then we can begin the change. This right here is great, but a one time, like Miss People said, this needs to continue on, because I used to always tell them, I am what I repeatedly say and do. So if we repeatedly begin to teach them and show them, do the on hands traffic stops and mock things to show them and put them actually in those positions. And it's not all traffic stops, and we know that. It's just life in general. You walk in a store and there's an issue, or something goes down because your skin is dark, you get picked that you did it or you didn't do it. So, just to educate our community, to let them know we may be older, but man, we love you guys. We see what's going on, and we want to walk it with you. We want to be out there. I like being. I was a grunt type office supervisor. I wanted to be out there where the people were. Put me out there where it's going on, and that's how we can make a change. Meeting them where they're at. Meeting them where they're at.
All right. Well, we thank you for that. Let's see. We're going to go back to our next panelist.
All right, I'm gonna take this one over. That's cool with you, Dad?
Yes, sir.
Righty. All right, so next we have Officer Brian Nguyen, hails from Cleveland, Ohio, attended and graduated from the University of Toledo in 2010 with a bachelor's degree. He comes from a law enforcement family. His mother was served as a police officer for the Cleveland Police Department for over 10 years. His 4 uncles are currently police officers in Cleveland. He has over 8 years of experience in law enforcement and currently serves as a police officer for Bowling Green State University. And of course, I know this officer personally, one of my fraternity brothers, and I've been knowing him since I've been at Bowling Green State University, seeing him on campus, serving the community there and keeping us safe, honestly, and I have done a great job of doing that. So, Brother Bubba, Brian Nguyen, if you would want to give a couple words about how you feel or your stance on the topic of policing in Black and brown communities, and just give me some thoughts that you have. Is he on here today?
If not, we'll go. Officer Nguyen, you available?
Well, tap in with him, make sure everything's good. I'll give him a call here. But we can move on for now.
Okay, let's do that. 1 second here. All right, William, go ahead and take it.
Right. So next we have my other brother, Mark DeWitt, is a Dayton, Ohio native and a graduate of Central State University, from which he holds a bachelor's degree in history and economics. Mr. DeWitt has worked to promote higher education, African-American students at Central State University, Rice State University. Mr. DeWitt now serves at St. Clair Community College as a coordinator for the African-American Male Initiative, where he is tasked with helping men of color stay in college and graduate by fostering a community of care, allowing young men to establish a sense of connection and belonging in college that ultimately improves life's outcomes. A few of Mr. DeWitt's accomplishments, as we see, Parodies Inc.'s Dayton Black Leadership Development, board member of the City of Dayton's Community Police Council, Mayor's five police reform groups, one of Dayton's top 10 African-American males by Parody Inc., St. Clair's Athletic Hall of Fame Selection Committee, board member of the House of Bread, member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and is the father of Savon, Ethan, Caden, and Landon. So once again, Mark DeWitt, it's great to have you on the call today. If you wanted to share a few things about your feelings on the topic of policing in Black and brown communities today, just a few things, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Brother Peterson. It is, it's just a necessity. It's a necessity that we as members of the community educate ourselves about, especially now. I have spent most of my career as an educator. I think I guess what draws me to the table is while working my way through college, I spent 6.5 years as a corrections officer. I worked in Monday Correctional Institution, was a supervisor there. So spent a portion of my career working in conjunction with law enforcement. And now a lot of work that we do since, in the past year, just everything that's come to light and all the conversations that are long overdue, but I guess more so, we have more of an ear right now with the majority about the concerns that we have for policing in Black and brown communities. And so it's just important to have educators, politicians, and everybody at the table to have these conversations. So just glad to be a part of that.
Our first question, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
So I'm gonna see this, pitch this first question to, I think, actually we have one more panelist. Wow, one more panelist. Officer Ronald Strahaley, are you available?
I am.
All right, Officer. So if we can't have, so now Officer Strahaley is a recent addition to the panel, and so we're gonna allow him to kind of talk about his background in law enforcement and his overview, and just kind of respond to the context of the state of affairs with policing in Black and brown communities from your standpoint.
I've been a police officer for 26 years. My entire career has been set on the west side of Dayton. I do a lot of the initiatives. I do a lot of the interaction with people. I've worked with Ms. Seeley and Mr. DeWitt. We have, mostly it's the reaching out and getting, whether they're Black or white, the kids of Dayton to realize what their rights are and what they can do and can't do when they encounter police. A lot of it is through schools. We've gone through Mound Street Academy, Deca Prep, Ponens High School. And then anybody that really wants it, we reach out, we give them that education through the mock traffic stops, through encounters on the street. Interaction Police is one of the biggest classes we teach, along with the Citizens Academy. And we'd like to start a juvenile Citizens Academy for those people that are under 18. And it's basically informing them of what we do and how we do it and why we do it, and just basically their rights and what they can be expected from the police.
Thank you for that. So the first question is, when we talk about the state of affairs, when we talk about the state of affairs in this situation, I want to pull up a picture here, and I'm going to also start off with you, Pastor Bridgman. And hold on one sec, let me share my screen. And you guys see that?
It's the PowerPoint right now.
Yes. So when you see this picture, Pastor Bridgman, what jumps out at you in this picture?
What jumps out at me looking at that picture is that there's a problem. And there are people who are concerned about the problem. And also that there's hope for change. And I see that when I see officers kneeling. It suggests that there's some hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Certainly appreciate that. Mr. DeWitt, what are your thoughts?
We talked about the juxtaposition of the picture, the top left-hand corner versus the bottom right-hand corner. Of an issue, what can be done when we talk about working in these and then the issues that are exasperated a lot of times in terms of what's going on.
You muted.
Mr. DeWitt, you may have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. As much time as we spend on Zoom, we should all be better at that. So I was just talking about the top left-hand corner representing, what can be in the possibilities in terms of policing in brown communities. And the bottom right-hand corner being, an example of that state of exasperation that it seems like we constantly exist in now. And the rest are examples of people affected by that and a response to that from, I see the athletes as representation of the rest of us, and then just to the everyday people walking around in life. And so I see those two extremes, what can be and what is. And so the challenge is, what are we to do about it? And I think part of it is this gathering here today. And so thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ms. Peoples, same question.
I see there's just so much. I see young people engaged, and so there's like this intergenerational aspect to it. I see bodies who are feeling pain and hurt and trying to communicate that with their own bodies that are in pain. So I see kneeling, I see words, I can't breathe. Clearly, I see the Lakers, LeBron James, number 23. these bodies simultaneously being hurt and bombarded by violence and by suffering, and at the same time using their own wearied bodies to try to make change. I see then contrast to that image, law enforcement bodies kneeling, which for me suggests a deep and severe miscommunication and inappropriate response, in the sense that, you know, like how the ways in which the bodies in blue uniforms can, you know, since they have power, it not being so much an issue of them being able to take a knee, but being able to translate the purpose of the knee into shifting and renegotiating policies and structures so that folks, weary bodies, Black men don't actually have to kneel anymore.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Miss Judy, are you with us? Officer Sister Haley, what about you?
Yes, I see a lot of people moving towards the center, which is exactly what we need. There a lot of effort being put into getting to that center and getting to that understanding.
Absolutely. Miss Seeley, are you available?
Yes, I am. For some reason, I was unmuted. But I see a lot here. And this corner, the bottom right corner, and all of it is showing that you have people who are reaching out for change. That there's something that everybody is agreeing and disagreeing. Everyone is on one accord about something that we're in agreement and disagreement about what's going on in life.
Okay.
And it, you know, that's what I see.
I'm going to any of the panelists can grab this question. But let's talk a little bit about the context and the history behind policing. I know I had the opportunity to interview a lot of you, and it was amazing, the depth of knowledge and insight and passion that you had on this topic. So I don't know who wants to take this first, but again, let's talk about the history of policing and where that starts and how that impacts what impacts it has on how things are today.
I'll kind of try to throw a little bit out there to get us going on it. I think most of us understand the history of policing and have made the connection to slavery and freed slaves and so on and so forth. And that's why it's so relevant to today's topic, policing in Black and Brown communities. The seminar that I teach, Think Free, Feel Free, Live Free, is directly associated with the history of slavery. And each encounter, oftentimes we are psychologically put into a state of criminality, as if you've done something wrong and you've done nothing wrong, right? And so it's the freedom of the slaves that was considered, or the former slaves, that was considered a crime. The idea that they were free was considered a crime. And so any movement, anything that was happening in their lives, trying to survive, obviously when the slaves were set free, they had nothing, no homes, no place to actually be. So then you got the vagrancy laws and all of these things that they couldn't control at the moment. So I'm a criminal because somebody says I should be somewhere when I have nowhere to be. right? And so a lot of our encounters begin with where you're supposed to be or where you are. And so that's kind of the history and why it's so important today, because these are the same dialogues that are taking place. These are the same conversations that are taking place. These are the same premises, if you will, for interactions.
Anyone else want to take that question?
Well, when I grew up, I had the false impression when I learned about the police, when you talk about the police and all of that, they used to come to our school and all of that. You always thought the police was on our team, that we were all on the same team, that the police and the thing was to be against crime. You know, if you didn't commit a crime, then you ain't got to worry about the police coming against you. And I think the sad part was as a young, some of the things that we experienced, which I experienced as a young person, you know, when I encountered the police, that the police wasn't always not necessarily there to help me, but you know, it's just that sinking feeling that you find that some cops are not really there to help you. They're there to ensnare you, to entrap you, or to get you on something that, one time I kind of got into a car where I didn't get in an accident with anybody, but my car kind of slipped off the road and into a ditch. And all I needed was somebody to help me, and I could get the car out of the ditch. And the police pulled up to help get me out of the situation, but they gave me a ticket, which put me in a serious situation. I was like, all I really needed, if I would have ran into anybody else, they would have just helped me get my car out of the ditch. I didn't hurt nobody. I didn't hurt myself. The car wasn't even hurt. And so, you realize that are the police on our team, or are they on their own team out to get me? And it's kind of starts with a lot of that situation with me, is that I felt like I don't need anybody else out to get me. I got enough when it comes down to crime. Why can't I call the police for help if that's what they're there for? So it's kind of having that double mind that you need the police when you need help, but you don't want the police because they may not come to help you, but they may be the very ones that come to ensnare you. So it's that double-mindedness that we have when we call upon police that kind of hurts the whole situation, because we don't have nobody else to call in society to help when it comes down to crime situations or anything like that. Who can we call on? Who can we depend on and not get ensnared, so to speak? So that's kind of, that's something that I'm seeing as a problem myself.
One of the points that resonates with me is because we, everything, every aspect, every system, every organization, everything has a pattern and history. And so, as Pastor T mentioned, we are all clearly well versed in the history of law enforcement and in this nation. And so I'm hearing what Pastor T mentioned, and also leaning on the words of Ron and his interpretation of the picture, and a sense of like people as a community, like people's moving to the center. And it has me to think like part of that center may include or should include as a people, and certainly as the African American community, members of the African diaspora, but in all communities, like being bold enough to perhaps step into creating entities that truly serve and protect, in a way that is detached and untethered and detangled from a past that was never meant to do that for all people, right? And so there seems to be a wonderful opportunity for conversations and creativity and imaginations to think about what does an organization that protects human life and the sanctity of lives look like if the historical root of our current iteration of that organization has no space and spaciousness for that.
Brother Peterson, I think that I think there's a you know, people who find themselves living in these communities and who, you know, socialized to not necessarily see the police as like friends in terms of community. There is a historic and systemic nature to all of that, and so you know, some people in the majority, or even some people that sit around tables when we talk about police reform and things, you know, will tell you that there's not necessarily a systemic problem. But I would challenge and say that a lot of those people have not been privy to, you know, some of the history that, you know, shows, I mean, in any system, there are systemic issues. I think, you know, you and I talked the other day and I talked about, you know, it's no fun when, you know, when the rabbit has the gun. And so what it is now the narrative is coming from a different place. And so the narrative now is Black and brown people that live in communities like the ones that we live in. I've never been in trouble with the law. I've never been, you know, had a criminal record or anything like that. But because of the community that I live in and coming from Dayton, I've had more interaction with the police, as much interaction with the police as any of my friends who've chosen a life in the streets. And so it's those types of kind of causalities that lead us to feel in large part that the police haven't been there, you know, to serve and protect us, so to speak. Yeah. And so it's, you know, the reason that I sit around some of the tables that I do is because I understand the need for that to change. But the problem is the history of, I mean, Black people in this country, and just the narratives that have always been pervasive about us. You know, there's a movie called Birth of a Nation, and when it premiered, Woodrow Wilson was the president, and he said that it was like writing history with lightning, and talked about the credibility of how true the story was that it told. And it was a terrible depiction of Black and brown people as criminals. And I don't think that our narrative has ever changed in terms of that criminality to the larger, you know, majority population for some. And so it's that we're up against. It's not just the police, as Al talked about, not being there to necessarily help us, but it's that narrative that we're up against. And so, you know, sitting around the table trying to affect policy and some of the things that we work on is because the narrative has to be different. It just has to be. And so we have to have conversation. We have to continue to push conversations like this. I'm always appreciative, you know, when Ron's office responds when we request an officer, you know, to participate, because we have to have conversations to attack this from within as well as without. And so just as much as we need the voice of the riot and the protest, you know, we need these insider conversations around the table. So I thank Officer Smith for being here.
Yep. I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Wimberly.
Yeah, I have a comment. The one thing that I see is the perception of what the police think is safety. You know, I think that sometimes when you see more Black and brown people in a neighborhood, it's automatically deemed as unsafe. And the contrary, you have more white people in the neighborhood, it's deemed as safety. So the question I would have to people that are on the call that's in law enforcement, is the training. How much training do you guys have on, different neighborhoods and what you need to do, the protocol? Because I know that there was a lot of concern about that police don't have enough training, where, as an engineer, you got to have 4 to 5 years to get an engineering degree. A lawyer, a doctor, why is that not, and I'm not saying you need 4 years, but why is that not the same as a police officer?
Officer Ron, you mind taking that question?
I don't mind taking that at all. I've taught 15 years at the academy. Yes, we appreciate those with the college education. We do teach cultural diversity, procedural justice, some of them 40 to 8 hours, 40 to 8 hours in the academy. But a lot of the training comes in that 9 months that they're on the street. When you're in the academy, you don't know if you're going to go east, you don't know if you're going to go west, you don't know where you're going to be assigned until you're actually assigned there. And that's where it's not so much the race. It is if you're assigned to the east side, your training officer is going to say, okay, this area of Xenia Avenue is a hot spot for drugs and prostitution. Here's what we're doing about it. If you're on the west side, when I came on, it was Hopeland, Bolander was where all the drug activity was happening. It is more of the cultural biases are established way before the police department gets involved. There are officers that do have cultural biases, and there are cultural biases that aren't going to change. But those are the ones that kind of have to be weeded out, and that should have been weeded out long before they put the badge on.
So
yes, it would be nice in a perfect world.
What type of tests are they taking? Because obviously you can't change somebody's bias, but you can weed out the people that are biased. And maybe some of those tests that you guys have may be skewed. And yes, on the job training is important, but there has to be something to be able to weed out some of the bad apples before something bad happens.
The preliminary testing before you even go into the police academy, those tests are given by social services. The police department have nothing to do with it. They're given a lie detector test, a psychology test.
Come on.
A psychology test, and then the interview process that they go through. Normally, we only graduate about 2/3 of the people that go into the academy because of that weeding process. And then about 80% make it off of probation where they're actually on the street. And then it's still got to the point that you can get fired at any time for that inappropriate behavior. And it's kind of more of an in-house. I don't know where most of you work, but if somebody gets fired from your facility, it doesn't make the news. Most of the time when we fire somebody, it also doesn't make the news unless they've done something catastrophic. There's a constant weeding process that goes through. And like I was about to say, in a perfect world, yes, it would require a college education to become an officer. But even now we're having trouble getting officers. Our last recruit, when I came on, there were 3,000 people who took the test. Last time there were about 400. It is not a job that anybody wants to go.
Certainly appreciate that. William, I'm going to go ahead and give the next question to you as a facilitator.
Right. So kind of basing off of that, I hear, well, the question I wanted to ask, and it's open to everybody, was how can we redefine the perception of police? So in our communities, just to give a little background, I know I'm speaking for like the younger generation right now. And we kind of spoke about the history of policing and the perception that has brought about now current times, and even seeing current events that have happened with police and Black people in general. we have a perception now that the police aren't necessarily here to protect. There's a fear instead of a feeling of safety. So how can we start to redefine the perception that police in our communities?
Can
I'll take that.
Jump in here? I'm gonna say,
sure.
I appreciate the question, William, and it's funny because like I think we touched we glossed over this in some previous conversations with your father, and that so it's and both. That is a wonderful and very poignant question, and that isn't as if that's the question for the Black community. I would offer that that is not a weighted question that we need to add on to the weight that we're already holding in terms of changing the narrative or the contextual, the historical roots, or how an entity is perceived. That should not be squarely placed on bodies who are experiencing suffering from those entities, right? Like I would offer that is a question that should not only be asked by law enforcement like across the board, but like having some true like actions to then disrupt the perceptions and change which aren't just perceptions, those are like truths and realities for people, right? So that I wouldn't want, like as a mother, and I told William, I don't want my son should not be obligated to figure out how he's going to survive and navigate how to come back home from a normal traffic stop, as well as how to help change the narrative of that reality on behalf of entities that are making it so that he can't come home, right? Those are like, that is not his thread to hold.
Can I jump in as well? And I appreciate that sentiment. That was one of the reasons that I thought this book, The Police Encounter Bible, was so important to write. Because I don't believe we as the people can change this, right? Not from the street level, from the encounter level. There has to be accountability, which means there has to be laws, and those laws are enforced very seriously and harshly on officers who have that much power that you use to victimize a community and victimize people. So it's important that we understand that we are that we don't have the power during the encounter, nor do we even have time to think about that during an encounter of how do we change this system that we're dealing with. That's a responsibility, and we've had presidents and members of Congress have talked about this. We just had the big George Floyd Act thrown out, where half the country went against, simple things that were going to help in a sense that I don't think personally it went far enough, but that were going to at least help. And until law enforcement agencies, and I'm not just talking about the officers who are committing those acts and terrorizing the community. I'm talking about every level of that organization being held accountable for who you're putting on the streets and who you're standing by and watching these things happen. Until those people are being held accountable for their actions and not being able to go home after someone's life has been traumatized or hurt, I don't see it changing very quickly. So this is why we have to control what we can control. And that's why I put the book in the book, Approaching Police Encounters from a Position of Knowledge, understanding your rights, understanding what kind of a encounter you're actually in, understanding how to assert your rights without being confrontational, how to cooperate and comply, and understanding where you don't have to do that, but to do it because your life could be very much on the line during that encounter. So it's not the responsibility of the people. And I'd like to ask if somewhere down the line, you know, what type of training are officers getting as it pertains to the rights of citizens? And what type of disciplinary actions are taking place when you willingly violate the right of a citizen? What kind of training are you getting on what a citizen's rights are? Because I've, you know, done some extensive research, and I've watched probably 1 million live, uncut encounters with law enforcement officers who know a person's rights and know that they're violating the rights of an individual, and how that escalates into someone being arrested or someone being hurt who hasn't done anything wrong, right? So what training do you get? Do you get training that a person has a right to remain silent? Obviously they do, because you tell them that when you're reading them their Miranda rights. So why are you gonna make me talk through force? And what happens when that actually takes place and that report gets back? See, in our world, the civilian world, we think you're gone. You know, you've committed an offense. You need to be you make all of us look bad. If a person understands their rights and asserts their rights, then understand that they understand. And I apologize. And I try to control myself because I'm very passionate about this.
That's perfectly fine. I definitely agree with the knowledge is power theme that I've heard a lot going on. And that's definitely something that I can agree with, especially coming, like I said, coming from my generation, as far as believing that I think sometimes fear can come from ignorance. Not saying, like, I do agree that we shouldn't have to worry about police, whether we're protected or not. And that is an extra weight that we shouldn't have to worry about. But I do also feel that we do have responsibility to our communities to give them that knowledge as well, like you were speaking on. And I feel like that's kind of a way to maybe redefine authority that we are, you know, experiencing within our community. So I think it starts within us too, but I also see the point that you're saying as well. But I know Big William Peterson, I know you had a slide that you wanted to show real quick for the panelists and audience to respond to.
Well, before you move past that point though, Brother Peterson, I wanted to also chime in. I agree wholeheartedly with what Sister Ray and Pastor Bridgman are saying to an extent, but I have to push back some to say that I don't think it's incumbent upon us to make those connections and to answer this, you know, these really tough questions. But I do think it's because it's our communities and because who has ever helped us without us helping ourselves. I think that, you know, there's always ownership because it's our communities that we're talking about. You know, and I don't push back as to say, oh, well, I disagree with you. I push back as to say that, you know, I think we have to be part of the solution because we've always been our own solutions. And historically, I don't see that changing anytime soon. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to be at the table, to demand a seat at the table. Some of the committees and the things that I sit on, I mean, are great, and that's fine. And so it's not, I'm not saying like, oh, I'm doing everything that I can and you know, follow my example, but I think that there do have to be people that look like us at the table to push back and say, to ask the policy questions. I had the most boring meeting I've been in since I've been in the police reform table, you know, last night. I mean, because we were literally going line and verse through the use of force policy. Not exciting, not riveting, nothing to, you know, write home about, but it is important that we make the types of distinctions that we're making at the table when we're looking at these policies that talk about diffusing situations and making sure that we use verbiage like de-escalate, which speaks to the training that we do want them to have, officers that are on the streets. Addressing issues like the fact that to work for the city, you used to have to live in the city, and so now you don't anymore. And so now we're policed by people that don't live in our communities, and that is a problem because somebody gave the example earlier when the police arrive on a situation and you see a gathering of, you know, Black men or, you know, certain groups of people, if you're not from or of that community, then it may be more alarming to you than it needs to be. And so it's just, we have to have voice and we have to have some say in the solutions to these issues. You know, it is, you know, there's some want to be like, it's not our problem, so why is the solution on us? Well, the solution's on us because it's killing us. Sister Ray's made several mention of, you know, the pressure put on the Black body, you know, the how that weight lies there. Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about that and talks about how with such impunity that these racial matters fall on us. And so it's kind of up to us to find those solutions and teach our community. I have 4 sons. And so, like you said, I want them to survive those encounters. You know, 2 of them sleep in the next room or of driving age. And so I need them to survive any encounter they have like that. And I can't sleep at night if I take the position that, well, it's not on me to solve it. And so I think we do have a part to play.
Excuse me real quick. I didn't want to be rude or anything, but my name is Miles Johnson, and I just wanted to introduce myself real quick as a millennial on this phone call, and as someone that William Peterson III personally invited. I just wanted to say it's nice to see all these beautiful faces and to learn from everyone on this call for the past hour. I do have class, so I'm about to go, but I just thought it'd be nice to introduce myself and say hello to everyone.
Hello.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Which one?
Mr. Older Mr. Peterson.
Young one.
I wanted to see, can I just kind of ask a question, make a comment as well?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I was just listening to everyone. I'm reminded of what I believe she's more of a diversity educator, Jane Elliott, has shared in her opinion of our nation. And one thing that she says is that it would be miraculous for a Caucasian person to grow up in America and not have some form of supremacy mindset or racism within them. And her basis on that has to do with looking at the big picture, because this is such a huge, I think Pastor T said a little earlier, such a huge undertaking because of the fact that we're talking about at the essence, not even the policies or the particular organizations that we're talking about or community. We're talking about people. And her basis behind this was simply that even in our educational system, from the time that young people begin in preschool and kindergarten, there are certain ways that that white history is taught. There are certain ways that Black history is taught. And all of us are a part of that system of education. And so it puts within us an image of who white people are as a whole and who Black people are as a whole. And then when you then add to that, not only the educational system, but also the media, the portrayal of Black people versus the portrayal of white people, and the images and things we see, it's just an ongoing, to me, my opinion, an ongoing vicious cycle of representation of a supremacy, that all things that are good are white, and a lot of things that are bad are Black. Even in communities, I think Greg said a little earlier, looking at communities, if you live in a certain community, that means you're in a safe community. If you live in another community, it means that you're not. And so now you have officers, and I'm talking about the good officers, the officers that are going into a profession that they really feel they have a calling to. Now they may be going into that profession, and they may not specifically be someone, I'm out to get someone, but it's once again the biases from growing up that, hey, I need to watch my back even more in this area or with this person than someone else. And so it's such a systemic, huge undertaking that I think, I mean, from childhood up, there has to be huge change, from the governmental level, I guess, in reference to our educational system. I mean, it's just so much, but I mean, to me, even Mark, I think, said a little earlier, the educational system plays a huge role in how we perceive ourselves, as Judy said, with identity, and we perceive others, where people are concerned. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out as well, because there's so much in play in order to correct this, really this atrocity.
Right. And I want to go. Stop it there. I'm actually going to pass to you, Ms. Sealy, in a second.
Okay, that's fine, dude.
Okay. And so, based off of what you said, I know, and I agree with it is hard to try to break down these worldly systems that we have in place that have been around for so long. Definitely is very, very hard to try to break those down, and that's, like I said, that's been around so long. So I want to direct the question to Judy here, and I wanted to know your opinion or your wisdom on like creating a new policing system for our environment. And I know we have seen that in our history with the Black Panther Party. We've kind of seen how that went, but how do you feel about that now in our modern time, where people are passionate right now about creating a new policing system for our community specifically?
And
it's more than just policing as well. I mean, the Black Panther Party did a lot more than just policing, but just knowledge and as well as the policing side of it.
I think we all are talking about, what our issues are, and Ms. Peoples and Mr. Briggerman were talking about how that's too big for us to try to change and control, that should not be our responsibility. But at the same time, the people are the responsibility. And I think that we can do our change through legislation, as far as maybe the big picture, who we put in. The Justice Department needs to change. It needs to start at the Justice Department. And if we can get on one accord, if we go back to the Constitution that says we the people, if we can get them to let us live by the Constitution, we can get something done. We're created equal. We're all the same. Through who we put in legislation, we begin to educate our people. And then at our level, we got schools, we have churches, we have economic and development, we have all these other programs Mr. DeWitt is in. If we can all get on one accord and teach and say the same things, we have power. That Black Lives Matter. It's already shown that we can move, that when we come together, and it's not all Blacks that's in that, it's all people. So if we can start with legislation, who we put in, we need to change who we put in. We need to put people in that's for us. We need to put people in who's going to do what they say they're going to do and what we need. Because this is serious. This is serious. It's not getting any better. You think about what Martin Luther King when they were marching and what's going on. We marching now, and to me, it's worse than when they were marching. What's getting done? What's changing? How do we change this? Through power. Through the most power we can have, and Pastor Moxley, is through prayer. If the city of Dayton came on one accord and did a fasting for 7 days, if they did it for 3 days, we could take control of something. I'm telling you, we can take control of something. If we can fast and pray in our churches and God change, can you imagine what he would do in our cities across the nation? Across the nation. Get on one accord, do the same thing.
Amen. Well, we got a slide here. I want to present this slide to you all, and thank you for that. I want to read a slide here in just a second. Give you all's feedback. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm just read through it. Although half of the people shot and killed by police are white, Black Americans are shot at a disproportionate rate. They account for less than 13% of the US population, but are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white Americans. Hispanic Americans are also killed by police at a disproportionate rate. We have a representation here on the left side of this chart of deaths per million people. And based on this chart, I just want to get, let's say, I'm not sure who I should direct the question to. Let's say Officer Ron, I would like to direct it to you because we haven't had a conversation just yet. About your take on this statistic and how you feel about this statistic. Your take on it.
It is obviously a rate that is way too high, and I honestly can't explain why the rate would be that high. I don't know that it is a bias against Black people, but I think it is a more of a cultural bias that says that, I think it goes back to the rate of incarceration of Black people are also way out of sight. And because of that perception that more Black people are criminals leads to that bias that are why there's a disproportionate rate of Black men that are killed by police.
And so is this chart here, is this, if you were to compare it at a chart to a chart from Dayton, Ohio, does this chart look like it is similar in comparison compared to our chart that we would probably have in Dayton, like set up like this?
It wouldn't be comparing apples to apples because the percentage of African Americans in Dayton is higher than that 13%.
Okay, so what are you aware of any other stats that in Dayton?
No, I've never looked into it. It'd be something that would be easy enough to do, but no, I've never done it.
Brother Peterson.
Can I tag in on that just for a second?
I was gonna call on you.
Okay, great. So we see these statistics, but I think it's also important for us to understand what police officers are killing Black people at this high rate, right? So it's not Black police officers that's killing people at this rate, and it's not Hispanic police officers that's killing people at this rate, either dynamic. It's white police officers. And that's an important thing for us to put on the table if we're really looking at having an honest conversation about how we're going to move forward. Because when the interaction or the encounter takes place for Black people, and I say people because Black women are subjected to some of the same treatments and hurt and harmed and die at the same rate. It's important for us to understand as Black people, there's two dynamics that are playing out during the encounter. Number one is whatever the dynamic of the law is. And then there's also the dynamic of the superiority of whiteness over Black. So in other words, you don't get to question me. You just do what I tell you to do. That's it. That's it. That you have to respond to me with some authority outside of me being a law enforcement officer, right? It's about me and that supremacistic nature that oftentimes we don't want to really have a conversation about, but that's the reality. And we have to factor in who's pulling the trigger, who's killing people, who's killing Black men at this rate, who's killing white men at this rate, who's killing others at this rate and with a badge and a gun. And so that we have to explore that more. Motive. We have to explore that a little bit more.
I'd like to respond to that. A lot of my training is I'm not considering myself to be superior to anybody, but yes, I want control of the situation when I enter the situation, whether that situation is Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Officers are trained, they have to take care of the situation and take control of that situation, because every situation that they go into, there's at least one gun. And when I treat white people, black people, Hispanic the same, and it's not a matter of me feeling I'm going to be superior. I have that feeling that I have to be in control for my own safety and for the safety of others.
Yeah, I wasn't saying all police have that mentality. I thought we had kind of established that when we talk about this, we're not talking about all white police officers that have that mentality, but we do know that mentality exists before, like you said earlier, they ever put on a badge and a gun, right? And so that having that type of supremacistic mentality, there's a less patience for a person of color in any way to challenge not necessarily their badge and their law, because we're trained the moment we can walk and talk to respect that. We're taught that as infants, you know, do what the police officer tells you to do. Yes, sir. No, sir. That's what we're taught. So we understand respect for the badge and respect for law enforcement officers. But what I'm suggesting is that the tolerance for adult Black men, young Black men to question an officer with a simple question or refuse or say something, there's a desire to control not the situation, but the person. And I think it's two different things. When you got George Floyd in handcuffs, you're in control of the situation. But now why is he still on his neck?
On that point, I agree. There are police officers that have that bias, that want control of the situation, but the majority of police officers are only asking for that control because of their training and wanting to keep themselves and others safe.
And I agree that's one of the reasons, but we encounter both of those officers. We encounter the other officers seems to be more often than we encounter the ones that just want control of the situations. And that's why I believe the conversation is so important. We're taught growing up to, you know, choose carefully who you hang with, you know, don't associate with this person, get away from them, because if they're bad news, then you're going to be seen as bad news. Then I think that our law enforcement community need to have that same standard. If there's a bad officer that's going to go against what we're trained and taught to do, then you need to disassociate yourself with them, get them out of the ranks. You know, we're taught that, you know, we want to tell, you know, you see something, say something, all of these things that makes the community safer. We need to have that same responsibility placed on our law enforcement community. If you see something, say something. Don't let it be said about your precinct. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, that's
bad police officers make us all look bad,
right?
And they need to go.
The deeper core, I think, that is coming through this is it's not about the individual like person, like the officer at that time. It's more about like how these bodies are, like the conditioning. It's like muscle memory, right? So connected to like the pattern and historical flow of this branch of our nation. Like it is a part of the muscle memory in a DNA in the organization. So even like, you know, even the most well-intentioned bodies or folks can actually, and we see it, yield harm and violence, right? So and the conditioning and the muscle memory comes up when an officer feels the need to have control in situations that there's nothing to have control over, right? So it's like the thought of are we talking about control? Are you talking about whether it's intentional or not, or conscious or not, like control over someone's body and person, right? So like for example, like there are plenty of examples, whether it's a young person going to the store to grab something to drink and something to eat and walking or never making it home, or even folks being in their bed and sleeping and not waking, you know, not living to see the next day. There's something that's still ingrained, regardless of what, you know, the training that's going on, or the good folks, the good and bad apples, or however way we want to frame it. It's about our history and the love affair of this country, of our systems, like the love affair of wielding violence on Black and brown bodies, right? And that's not to say that that's where we want to be as a nation now or as a community, but there seems to be how do we go deeper, or how do we get at the root? And if we can't get at a root, that's snuffing out lives and young people. Like how do, you know, like what do we do to just, what does something else look like?
Well, here's
educate.
Here's my question.
Yeah.
And this is probably directed towards Uncle Bruce or Pastor Moxley, Uncle Bruce over there, and my brother Mark DeWitt. I want you all to focus on this question. And I know the main thing I kind of been hearing is connecting with this younger generation. Well, myself, I'm old, but connecting with my generation and under me, honestly, as well. What are some ways that that you all think that we need to implement in order to create a connection between our generation, well, my generation, the generation above me, in order to like relay this knowledge that we are getting now, or that I'm even receiving? You know, how do we get a wider spread of this knowledge, and how do we make a connection to both generations in order to pass the knowledge down?
So first I want to acknowledge what Sister People just brought up about, you know, there's a such thing as generational trauma, and there's, I can't call the doctor's name, DeGraw, I can't remember the last name right now, but she talked about an experiment they did with mice in a tunnel. And so you had a mouse who was subjected to trauma, and during the trauma they were given a citric smell, so they smelled like oranges. And so in the next generation, lab rats that came from that mouse had a visceral response to the scent of orange. And so that's that generational trauma. The trauma that we perceive and that we receive generationally have been passed down to a certain extent. And so while a lot of people, usually liberals, will say, well, that was something that happened to Black people then, we're not responsible now. But when you look at these statistics that, like what we saw on the slide, I do think there are parts of that play into that. So there are biases that play into that don't necessarily mean, well, every cop that shot every Black man was racist, but every situation did need a measured response, maybe didn't require that level. And so there are some biases in there that we all deal with. I have a bias, you know, I have biases. My father's from the South, my mother's from here in Dayton, and you heard biases, you know, you heard certain things that, you know, I will politely call biases now, but that were probably racist that we heard when we were kids, you know. My brother and I went to college, and so you heard from one of our neighbors who has a deep Southern background, don't bring home no white girl. And so while I could politely call that a bias now, that was racism. And so we do learn and interpret and internalize biases from all of our experiences. And so no matter how well trained a police officer, no matter how prepared you are for these interactions, those biases play out in trauma, even when yours is a defense or a fight or flight response or whatever. And so use of deadly force makes those numbers look really, really bad. But there are things that we have to do to address these things. One of them is acknowledging that trauma that we've all experienced. The thing that makes this conversation so pertinent and relevant and close to the surface now is the fact that we experienced 8 minutes and 40 seconds of trauma we all experienced it together while we watched, you know, the death of George Floyd. And so how do those things play out? Then you see the riots, you see the protests. But then those responses that are very much biased are, you know, some of the militarized response we've seen from police in our communities. And so then when you say, well, how else do you expect police? And these are some things that I've heard around the table. How do you expect police to respond to, you know, this chaos and that and da 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 da? And then you see January 6th, and there's not that same response when the crowd doesn't look like us. And so now we're talking about like proof, hypothesis, experiment, proof. It's there in front of you. And so these traumas happen in the way that the powers that be, I would say, you know, respond is telling of the value of us. And so I go back to the phrasing that Sister Peoples is using. I talk about Ta-Nehisi Coates using. There is nothing inherently evil about these people who are truthfully interpreting the legacy that is this country. Is that to say that Officer Straley or any police officer that doesn't look like me is responsible for that? No, but you are affected by it. And how you respond to situations and scenarios is very much affected by it. And so what we have to do is, it is education. It is training. As we've sat around these tables, you know, we've been told a lot that what PATA controls how officers are trained, you know, how police officers are training. And so we have to go, like Sister Celie said, to legislation and talk about legislating how some of these things have to be changed. It may not be constitutional to require officers to be from Dayton, that police Dayton, but I would pose it as an experiment to say, how much different would those numbers look if officers from Dayton, police Dayton, black, white, or red, like it doesn't matter. And so I think there has to be some cultural sensitivity, more cultural sensitivity, and just more training added. Go ahead, Brother Moxley. I'm sorry about that.
No problem at all. I want to address Pete's question as well. But I did want to kind of throw this out. I do notice that, you know, within our society now, although I know these words are synonymous, there is a softer feel when we utilize the word bias. It's a much softer feel. Bias is prejudice.
Yes.
And I like that word better because that cuts to the core of what we're dealing with. We're talking about prejudice. So, you know, there is a difference between racism and prejudice.
Yes.
Racism is that system, and prejudice is the inherent favor that a person may have towards one thing versus another. So, for example, I remember some time back, maybe some years back, there was a white guy, right, I think over on James H. McGee. You know, he was walking with his AR. And the police approached him, but it was a different approach from the way that I believe if there was a black guy walking down, even with a 9mm in his hand, it's going to be it's a different approach. And that's where I believe that there are prejudices of who's more dangerous. Who's more dangerous, the white guy with the AR exercising his Second Amendment rights, or the black guy who also has Second Amendment rights walking down the street with a 9mm in his hand? Who looks more dangerous? And again, that comes back to the conditioning, I believe, that happens educationally and in many homes. So you know, as I would imagine, as a white person, most don't want to be seen as prejudice, but there are prejudices that subconsciously, I believe, we even have, that who looks more dangerous in those two situations. So, you know, that is something that is a major issue, going back to Ms. Peoples' point, that is just, it's a part of our psyche in our nation, and it's been you know, kind of conditioned from preschool on up throughout communities in our nation. But where our young people are concerned, William, I do believe that that is something that it is the responsibility of the adults to be educated in order to then turn around and one by one, as we are each encountering youth, because a lot of times we try to do it in masses, but as we are encountering youth, having that relationship, developing that trust, and then beginning to share that wisdom within our community and developing a culture of sharing generational wisdom. I look at other cultures, that is a huge thing. The respect of the elders and the respect of generational wisdom and tradition being passed down that, again, my opinion, I could be missing it, but I don't see that in our community.
Right.
Where we're passing down tradition and wisdom is something that is an expectation of our youth to respect that. And then so that when they grow up, they're not starting all back over again, but they're starting upon the shoulders of those that went before them. So I think it's a one-on-one, an individual basis, and it can grow into something, Pete. But you know, that again, that's just my opinion on that.
Yeah,
to include, like when you say, so we're saying education and training, and that is those two are needed, and then there's this piece of accountability.
Yes.
Right, holding, like, and like for all of us, like if we are professing to say we are, you know, we want to be just and we want to be equitable and we want safe communities, when that is not happening, particularly with those who are differently positioned to power than we might be. So for law enforcement, like the relationship then here is like for us to really commit to being consistent with holding officers and the entities and precincts accountable when the sanctity of life has not been respected, when one or two or some of their bad apples, so to speak, have gone rogue or gone astray, like to consistently be able to enforce ramifications around that, so that you begin to switch the narrative, like William was mentioning earlier, where we begin to switch the perception that we are about that law enforcement is about the work of realigning itself to all that it says it's professing to, you know, to be. So I think that accountability piece is critical.
Thank you. I think it's something that's not talked about enough. It's funny. Somebody really tried to call me on the carpet on the conversation that I was on with police chief, Springborough's police chief, and kind of discredit some people who were on the call because of the approach that they took. Was very vehement about that retribution, that response, that accountability. And so, you know, my answer to that, and even my response to people who were all about the action this summer, you know, and everybody was quick to quote Martin Luther King said, "Riot is the voice of the unheard," and you know, my response is I don't disagree with that. I think that I don't disagree with that completely. I think that there's a voice for everybody at the table. There are voices, there are people like me who, like I said, work from within. You know, I can probably tell you more about numbers and statistics for Black officers than Officer Straley. But these are the things that we've been studying and looking around the table. I know that there are 22 Black officers in the Dayton Police Department, and that's less than 6%. I understand that, but there's a place for every voice at the table. And if there's not a voice that has vitriol and you know, let cry the dogs of war, and you know, if you don't have that voice at the table, then 9 times out of 10, the powers that be aren't going to listen to Mark DeWitt's voice.
Right.
But then when you have that voice at the table that's pushing the envelope, that's pushing, you know, cops are this, and you know, and maybe stereotyping to a certain extent and pointing fingers and things like that, then you don't hear the measured monotone, you know, of my voice that may speak, you know, wisdom for the situation. And so there's a place for all those voices at the table. I think accountability it's way past time for accountability. Earlier on in the call, Albert Phillips talked about, he had a comment after that, he put something, he talked about qualified immunity. I think that goes back to the legislation conversation that Sister Celie was talking about. There do have to be some changes in laws into how these things are addressed. As a prominent scholar from Dayton, Bakari Lumumba, he's in Columbus working on a PhD, and he talked about legislating that, you know, when there's a involved shooting and it's found to be unjust, you know, that there be mandatory, you know, sentencing for crimes like that. And so it's legislation, I think, that can hold the answer to stop some of the wrongdoing that goes on. And it is education, but it's not education without action, Sister Peoples. You are absolutely right. It is. That's right. It has to be acknowledgement, and it also has to be some accountability, and not just because we're calling for it or because we're, you know, butthurt and moving forward from these situations. The problem is that, you know, we've dealt with so much trauma since, you know, being free in this country. Will Smith has a program called Amend I'm currently watching on Netflix, and he talks about the history of the 14th Amendment, and then he talks about the laws that followed that, how they really gutted the 14th Amendment in terms of its ability to protect us. So then you saw the Jim Crow South. And so now it's incumbent upon us, like I say, in education, because we're not dealing with Jim Crow, we're dealing with James Crow Esquire. And for us to be savvy and prepared to answer these questions when they're coming from the loftiest of ideals and places, and oh, this country's paid for this and paid for that. No, you really haven't. And so, you know, I'm not going to start the conversation about reparations on this call or what that should look like. There has to be some accountability. Go ahead, Pastor Bridgman.
I'm looking forward to it.
You know, I tell you what, we could go on another 2 hours on this, and I certainly want to be respectful of people's times. One of the things, I'm hopeful, and you know what I like to also offer is, you know, we were talking about someone had mentioned about the power of prayer, and this may not be for everyone on the call, but the ones who have ears will obviously hear this. He says, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and heal their land. And if there's no one else, I think everybody can agree, whatever side of the track you are on religiously / philosophically, and even politically, that our land is sick right now.
Yes, it is.
I think everybody can agree that what happened January 6th, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever, that was nuts. That was nuts. And I think even the politicians, for a split second, were for longer than a split second, for a few weeks were united that this, because, and obviously it was a selfish means to it, because they were under attack. And so we have got to understand at this point that, you know, that we do have some commonalities. So my question then, as we move forward here, is where do we go from here? You know, where do we go from here? And, you know, the two things from this limited conversation would be, consider ordering Pastor Bridgman's book. Now, again, it's not an infomercial for Pastor Bridgman, but I tell you what, that book, The Police Encounter, it stems from research. It stems from research, and it stems from a passion. So take a look at it. I tell you what, it's definitely good reading. Number two, pray for social justice. You know, I want to just give a shout out to Officer Strahaley. I mean, again, He came in at the last second, and you know, it was some very fierce conversation. Now I know some of those things can be uncomfortable, but guess what? You know, maybe that speaks to his 20 plus years of working in West Dayton, where he's kind of gained some compassion and understanding of how African Americans dialogue and things like that. So I definitely want to say that. But my question then becomes, where do we go from here? And that's open, that question's open to the panelists.
I think it has to go with more and more training, more and more understanding each other, and filling in the blanks between what is and what could be.
Training of officers, is that what you mean?
I think it goes to training of officers and training some of the young people to know what to expect and what their rights are. We mentioned earlier that some people would violate somebody's rights. If you don't know that your rights have been violated, you won't do anything about it. But if you know your rights, you know what is expected of an officer, and you have a channel of complaint, a channel of someplace you can go, then you should know about that as well. It's not so much training on how to act around officers, but it is on training what.
And really quick about that, Officer Ron, I wanted to just mention, like, I like that idea of training, and I was thinking just personally, thinking about ideas to actually put something in place. Of course, like scenario trainings, but like you said, both sides. So for instance, I think it's a great idea for the police and the communities to really start coming together and maybe even having a training that's held together. So that scenario training that we can have is basically kind of us seeing the effort that's being put in from the police officer side, and the police officer side seeing the work being put in from the citizens, actually trying to make sure that we can have communication with one another and be on the same page. So that's just something I wanted to throw out my little 2 cents about that. But I think some ideas can really be set in place to make this, like, some training and stuff like that happen.
I had a question for Officer Ron and
hey, Brother
and some
Al.
of those.
Brother Al.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can't. But we're right now. Let's stick to, because of time. Let's stick to the training. Right now, we're saying, what are our next steps? So we talked about training. Okay.
This is right in line with that. One of some of the next steps I think that could be taken, or one of the things that I wanted to ask those that's in the police training, because I think that the police officers have like this good old boy network, or where they kind of work together. They are in a union, or they in a fraternity or something like that, where they always together. In that, when you have an officer that is on the force, that is doing a lot of things that we know that are not good for the community. Do you guys really have a way to get rid of that officer when you know? Of course there's accountability, but I think that there is like a negative that when officers kind of squeal on each other or talk about it or tell on each other, that those type of things that happen in the community. Is there a way that officers deal with other officers that they know ain't doing right in the community?
Well, Mr. Phillips, I don't want to insult you, but you just kind of stereotyped all us officers as being part of the good old network. I haven't been a good old boy for years. And yes, there is internal processes that if you see something wrong, yes, you report it. You see something, you say something. I don't want that black eye just because this officer used too much force, or when the investigation comes around, I wasn't staring at this brick wall and didn't see anything. Yes, there are internal processes.
Well, the reason why
you should take advantage of.
The reason why I say that, because we all saw the George Floyd situation, and everybody looked and saw that the other officers were standing around and they were just allowing it to happen. And we all have seen things to that nature. So the confidence comes from both sides, as far as us being accountable to one another. And one of the things that I think that is important is that we as the people need to know that if there is something happening, that there are processes that are being taken places, and that the cops are not scared to deal with each other when that happens.
I agree. And I think everybody involved with the George Floyd incident were just as guilty as the guy on his neck. They should have interceded to help. They should have gotten him off of that. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback.
Right.
But the visual was totally wrong. It shouldn't have happened that way. And yes, as a more veteran officer, I think I would have interceded. But yes, there are internal processes, but like a lot of the processes that the police department do, even investigations that we do not only internally but externally are not public knowledge.
Right.
And that's something that's, with the chief that we have now, a lot of his creed and a lot of his accountability is because he is so transparent. When a shooting happens, he's on camera the next day saying what was wrong. I think we have a great police force in Dayton, but I think it can be better. And a lot of that is internal investigations and a lot of self-policing among them.
Ron, you muted yourself. And also, something he said early on that, you know, I don't want to go unnoticed, and it was really profound, is that, you know, somebody got fired from your job, like you said, it's not publicized. And although those things are public record and can be looked at, and trust me, when all of this conversation started here locally, we took a deep dive into a lot of that. You know, a lot of references to internal affairs they now call professional standards, and I deal with you know, a couple of them often. But the important part is that there is some transparency, and when we asked Dayton Police Department, what do these numbers look like, you know, then we were made to understand that a lot of these things are public record. You know, my knowledge of the number of Black police officers and, you know, percentages that represents on the force are all, I guess, tenets of, you know, that understanding. And I don't excuse them in, by any stretch of imagination, but, you know, like you said, where that work is done, you know, it is being done, and those are things that are being looked at. Budgetarily, hopefully it'll be a priority in terms of, you know, addressing the low numbers of any ethnic mix that's on the police force. But I think there's just more attention has to be paid, like you said, in terms of next steps to young people understanding, you know, law enforcement as a career option. It's going to be us that, again, make some of these changes. I think Officer Seeley might agree with that. The former Sergeant Seeley might agree with that. That it has to be some of us joining the force and being a part of that, and being a part of the conversation. When Desiree Timms was running for Congress, she often said, you know, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu.
Right.
And so I think we should be at the table. We simply have to be at the table to make some of these changes. And so the next step, how do we make this affable or you know, acceptable? We've got to change the narrative that we have, even in how we train the next generation in terms of responding to police, so that we can see more of them on the police force.
Yeah. So I think based off that comment, Brother Mark DeWitt, that one of our steps could be to create more avenues for these two generations to match. So when I say things like that, I mean as far as creating a social media presence for the message that we want to get across. You know, a lot of media youth are on social media, so that, you know, we definitely need to use to our advantage as we connect with each other, and trying to get this message out, because social media can do a lot of spreading of the message for us, rather than, I know Pastor Moxley earlier said it could be a one-on-one connection, but we can also, you know, expand. Now we have evolved into the social media age where the message that we want to get across can reach so many people. So I think that's an opportunity for us to just create more avenues and opportunities for people to gain this knowledge.
I agree, Pete. I think also something that Officer Straley can take back from this conversation is, you know, my suggestion, you know, well, I'm gonna tell my age with this. Y'all remember 21 Jump Street, where you had officers and teenagers and people that look like, they infiltrated high schools and did all that. And while all of that is fictional, I think that the department should look at starting a diversity and inclusion group. No offense to Officer Straley. Every time I make a call to the police department, Officer Straley, you show up, and I appreciate it. But some of the theory behind what I do in terms of helping young men finish school is the fact that I'm a role model, that they look at me and they see what college education, can and should look like, And not to say that Officer Straley is not an exemplary officer, which I'm sure he is, but I think they need to see more Black and brown people in uniform making these calls or answering some of these questions, because it's not that anything that you said is not valid, but it just comes from a different place when you see yourself as a person. If when Pete was in high school, I was an officer that showed up and said, y'all should go join the police force, I imagine it would go with more weight. And it's not to discredit anything that you do. Like you said, you and I have worked together, and I thank you for always showing up. But, in my Friday speaker series, I actually have a Friday speaker series today about knowing your rights, and I have an attorney coming to talk to my guys. I'm intentional about the messenger because I understand that it affects the palpability of the message. And so I just
hey Mark,
back and tell Chief to chew on that.
Hey Mark, I totally agree with you. But I also would like to add to what you said. I mean, not an either or, but a both and. Because what Officer Ron has done for me, I'll be very, very transparent in the respect that where what Al said, based upon my experiences, based upon where I come from and where I grew up, based upon the media, that's how that's really, for the most part, how I view officers. The blue line, they stick together, good or bad. And that is my prejudice where police are concerned. And I'm 50 years old. So what Officer Ron has done for me today is allowed me the opportunity to hear and see someone actually say from a white cop's perspective, hey, I'm not like this. We're not all like this. There are some.
That's right.
Which is very refreshing to hear a police officer say there are some, but most of us are not like that. That helps me to have some security, to know that, okay, that's a first step as a 50-year-old Black man to be able to say, okay, I won't look at every police officer that way. I'll give them the opportunity to show who they are. So I would recommend in these types of discussions that we have both representations, because I think our youth need to hear from both sides too. They need to be able to know that, hey, there's some white policemen that really are about doing their job. They want to get the bad guys, so to say, but they're not out to get people because of their socioeconomic level or their race or whatever the case may be. So, I was writing down notes and next steps that I would love to see both representations or all representation, so that everyone knows that, hey, there is some security across the board. And I'm not just going to go by the prejudices that I may have from my past, or the prejudices that only the media is going to show. The media is not going to show good things that policemen have done. They're just going to show, what sells. So, if I only see that, that's what I'm going to think. So I do appreciate everyone for this, and Officer Ron for your presence as well.
Ron, I'll also give you one last plug. You mentioned the Citizens Academy. I went through that training, or I went through that day at the academy, the Citizens Police Academy, run by Officer Chris Kowalski. It was enlightening. It was enlightening, the number of things that can go wrong in a traffic stop. It was enlightening. The flop house experiment and all of those things. And it's something that I think sometimes people should do. A couple of my guys went through it. My students from my program, I went through it. I think you'd be a better armchair quarterback, you know, if you experience some of those things and understand how police are trained.
I think, you know, really quickly and briefly, I think of James Baldwin. I love his work. I'm sure many of us are familiar with his work. But, you know, his quote, you see what I'm saying? Yes, James Baldwin, never leave home without him. You know, he says, you know, I can't trust what you say because I see what you do. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And so it's a constant reminder for the work in terms of like next steps, for our work to be intentional and measured so that our actions align with what we say and what we profess we want to manifest and create. And so for me, like, you know, what next steps might look like or looks like is ensuring that, you know, like all of these 8 points that are here, acknowledging that there's nothing new under the sun, and these things have in some way, shape, or form has taken on an iteration in generations before, or in movements before. So the next steps for us here and for you know, the young people getting, you know, like running it, like doing the work, is to make sure that these steps here don't become performative, where we're just doing it because it looks good, and we're then using social justice as the word du jour. Internal accountability looks nice and sexy, but it's not really, you know, taking root. So we really need to be serious and be and notice when our sincerity is becoming laxed and performative.
That's a good word, Ms. Peoples. I would like to invite State Representative Phil Plummer from Dayton, Ohio. He was the former sheriff of Montgomery County, and now he's a state representative. That way he maybe can guide us into our legislation of how to get things done. And he was definitely and still is a community person, and he really engaged in the Black community. So I would like to invite him here. I'm quite sure he would be honored to do that.
That's spell that last name. Is that 2 M's?
Plummer, yes, Plummer. Phil Plummer. He's a state representative here. I forget which district. I know he's out here, Huber Heights area. So we'd be more glad.
I tell you what, this has been awesome. And one of the things that we really would like to do to continue this conversation. And I don't know if you guys are in agreement. What we'd like to do is we'll invite everyone out. We're going to look at the last week in March to circle back. And we'll get information out to you all. But we want to have this conversation, and we want to look at some of these action points and kind of see where we are on these things, to have a way forward. I mean, is that something that everyone will be in agreement with? In concept, I mean, we got to work with schedules. I get that, but you know, again, with Zoom and email and phone calls, I think we can. You know, we do have a back office component that we can really do that. What is everyone's thoughts on that?
I think that's good, but I think you should, you know, I wouldn't necessarily need to be on that call in March, because I feel like what's emerging is really some like focus and intentionality with the community in Dayton specifically. And that's wonderful. And so I feel like the seat that I'm holding at the table, you like, that could be better used for a community member there specifically.
Okay.
I could fall back and then come at a later time.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to going forward and just seeing what we can accomplish with this group and those who would come on board. I'm excited about the idea of it, and so yeah, just keep me in the loop, and you know, I'm with you.
Ooh,
I
get
will
this
participate.
at work. If you haven't got it, pick this book, pick the book up. There's a link here. Pastor T Ministries.com. Is that correct, Pastor T?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Pastor T Ministries. And again, it's definitely a good read. And also we'd like to thank our sponsors that supported this: A Loving Heart Youth Services, Dominion Ministries International, Alpha Incorporated, and Willpower Enterprises. And and A3 Digital Studios. We appreciate you guys. In terms of getting the word out and continuing on with this conversation. We have everyone's email, so we will be putting this back out again for the end of March. And obviously between now and then, we'll all have conversations prior to that, one-on-one or two-on-one and things like that. Any other closing comments from anyone on the panel, outside of the panel? 1 minute if you do.
Mr. Peterson, if you'd share my email and phone number with everybody that wants it, I'm happy to help wherever they need it.
Ron, go ahead and give me that right now while we're on.
It's Ronald, 333-8990.
Got it right that time, didn't I? That's an
Yes, you
inside joke.
did.
Yeah. All right, we got it. Anybody else? Well, good. Thank you, guys. Listen, it has been a plum pleasing pleasure with this conversation. I'm excited for the day and going forward. Thank you to Ron. Thank you to Pastor Bridgman. Thank you to Judy. Thank you to Mark. Did I miss anybody?
That'd be it.
Thank you.